My seat was behind a support column, next to the emergency exit, facing the wall. I could see the back of two strangers' heads and a framed photo of the venue's founding year. And somehow, that still wasn't the most humiliating part of the evening. Let me back up. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 8 years, I've worked as a structural engineer for the Army Corps of Engineers. I've overseen bridge reconstructions in flood zones, managed infrastructure assessments after natural disasters, and spent 14 months embedded with a forward operating team in a region where the temperature hit 112 degrees before noon. I've been thanked by base commanders. I've had my work cited in 2 federal reports. I once received a commendation letter signed by a 2-star general that my mother used as a coaster at Thanksgiving, because she thought it was a flyer. My brother Daniel is a real estate agent in Scottsdale. He sells vacation homes to retirees and drives a white BMW that he mentions within the first 4 minutes of any conversation. He is 34 years old, well-tanned, and recently engaged to a woman named Brittany, who calls everyone babe, including waitstaff. Daniel has never been in any federal report. He has, however, been named his agency's top seller 3 years in a row, which my father mentions approximately once every 45 minutes when the family is gathered. Daniel's engagement party was held at a resort outside Sedona, the kind of place with a fountain in the lobby and staff who speak in whispers. My father had arranged everything. He'd flown in relatives from 4 states. He'd ordered a custom cake. He'd written a 2-page speech that he'd been practicing in front of the bathroom mirror for a week, according to my mother, who told me this like it was the most adorable thing she'd ever witnessed. I found out about the party through a text from my aunt, not from my father, not from my mother, not from Daniel, from my Aunt Patricia, who added a string of champagne glass emojis and assumed I already knew. I didn't already know. I found out 11 days before the event. I rearranged 2 site visits, handed off a project debrief to my colleague Marcus, booked a flight, and drove 3 hours from Phoenix in a rental car I'd paid for myself. I told myself it didn't matter that I'd been left off the original invite. I told myself it was probably an oversight. I told myself a lot of things on that 3-hour drive that I didn't fully believe. I arrived at the resort on a Saturday evening, just as the golden hour light was doing something genuinely beautiful over the red rocks. I checked in at the front desk, found my room, changed into the one dress I'd packed, a navy wrap dress, simple, professional, and took the elevator down to the event level. The ballroom was already half full. Round tables draped in cream linen, low floral centerpieces, votives everywhere, a string quartet near the far window. It was genuinely lovely. My father saw me from across the room. He raised a hand, not a wave, more of an acknowledgement, the kind you give a neighbor you see regularly but haven't spoken to in months. My mother was beside him, deep in conversation with someone I didn't recognize. She glanced over, smiled quickly, and returned to her conversation. Daniel was surrounded by a circle of people near the bar. He spotted me, said, "Hey, you made it," and then turned back to the group without introduction. Brittany touched my arm and said, "So great you could come, babe," and then was immediately absorbed by a photographer who needed her attention. I stood near the entrance for a few minutes. Then I found my name on the seating chart, Table 11. The round sticker had been placed at position 4, which, in the configuration of this particular ballroom, put my back directly to a white structural column that ran floor to ceiling. To my left, the emergency exit with its faint red glow. In front of me, the view of a secondary hallway leading toward the restrooms. I could hear the string quartet. I could not see the string quartet. I could not see the head table, the cake display, or the small stage where my father would later give his speech. I sat down. The other seats at table 11 filled gradually. A cousin of Brittany's who worked in insurance. His wife, who was kind but talked exclusively about their renovation. An older couple who appeared to be neighbors of my father's and who, based on 30 minutes of conversation, believed I worked for the government, something with buildings. I didn't correct them in either direction. The first hour passed the way those hours do, quietly, at the edges. I watched my father move through the room like someone running for office. Handshakes, laughter, a hand on the shoulder, that particular smile he reserves for moments he wants recorded. He stopped at nearly every table. He did not stop at table 11. At one point, I watched him put his arm around Daniel and say something to a group of people that made everyone laugh. Daniel ducked his head in that way. He has self-deprecating, charming, and my father looked at him the way I had spent most of my life, hoping someone in my family would look at me, like there was nothing in the room worth watching more. I ate the salad course. I drank water. I kept my expression pleasant and neutral in the practiced way I'd developed, over years of project briefings where I was often the youngest person and the only woman, and had learned that showing too much of anything gave people an RUS30 excuse to focus on the wrong thing. I was fine. I had made peace with being fine a long time ago. Then the man at the table across the aisle leaned over. He was older, mid-60s. I guessed with the kind of bearing that comes from decades of being the person responsible for decisions that affect large numbers of other people. Silver-haired, straight-backed, in a dark suit that fit the way expensive suits fit. He was sitting with a woman I assumed was his wife and another couple, and he had been, I noticed now, watching the room with the same quiet attention I had been. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Excuse me, are you Claire Whitfield?" I set down my fork. "I am," I said. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that meant something. "I thought so. Robert Haynes. I don't know if you remember, we met briefly at the Infrastructure Symposium in Denver, about 3 years ago. You presented the preliminary findings on the Route 17 bridge assessment." I did remember. Not his face clearly, but the symposium, a 2-day federal conference on infrastructure resilience. I had been the most junior person presenting. I had been terrified and had managed not to show it. "I remember the conference," I said. "Your assessment was the best thing presented that weekend," he said, simply, without embellishment. "The modeling methodology you used was cited by our office 6 months later in a congressional brief." His wife was smiling. The other couple at his table had turned to listen. I said, "I appreciate that. I didn't know it had been cited." "It was," he said. "You should know that." He paused. "Are you with the course still?" "Yes, sir. Senior project engineer now." He nodded like that, confirmed something he'd already suspected. Then he turned back to his table, and I turned back to mine. The cousin of Brittany's wife leaned over and asked, quietly, "Who is that?" I realized I hadn't actually registered the title. "I'm sorry?" "The man you were just talking to. He seemed, I don't know, important." I glanced back across the aisle. A woman nearby had apparently recognized him and was speaking to her husband in a low voice, gesturing slightly. A man at the next table had straightened in his seat. I found out later, through the quiet current that moves through rooms like that one, that Robert Haynes was a former Undersecretary of the Army, now heading a major federal infrastructure advisory board. He had, apparently, attended the party as a longtime family friend of Brittany's parents, a connection neither Daniel nor my father had thought to mention, or perhaps had not known the full significance of. He was seated at table 10, one table away from the emergency exit. Dinner continued. My father gave his speech from the small stage, the 2 pages he'd practiced, about Daniel's determination, his warmth, his success, the pride he brought to the family. It was a good speech. My father is genuinely funny when he wants to be, and the room laughed at the right moments and went quiet at the right moments. He thanked Daniel's friends, Brittany's family, the out-of-town relatives who had traveled far. He did not mention me by name. There was a moment I kept thinking there would be a moment where he would glance toward table 11 and say something. An acknowledgement, a mention, anything. But the speech ended with a toast to Daniel and Brittany, and the room raised their glasses, and I raised mine, and that was that. I was doing the math on whether I could leave gracefully in the next 20 minutes, thank the table, retrieve my cardigan from the coat check, slip out when I heard the microphone crackle again. I looked up. Robert Haynes was standing at the stage. He hadn't been invited up. He had simply stood, walked forward with the ease of a man accustomed to standing in front of rooms, and accepted the microphone from the event coordinator, who appeared slightly uncertain but handed it over anyway. "I apologize for interrupting the program," he said. His voice was measured and unhurried. "My name is Robert Haynes. I'm an old friend of the Caldwell family, Brittany's side, and I want to say congratulations to Daniel and Brittany on this next chapter." Polite applause. Daniel nodded from the head table. "But I would be remiss," Haynes continued, if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge someone in this room whom I recognized earlier this evening and couldn't leave without saying something. He looked across the ballroom, directly toward table 11. Claire Whitfield is a structural engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers. She presented research 3 years ago in Denver that, frankly, was more rigorous and more clearly reasoned than most of what I've reviewed in 40 years in federal infrastructure. Her work was cited at the congressional level. Her methodology influenced projects that, right now, are making bridges safer for hundreds of thousands of Americans. The room was very quiet. "I don't know what her family knows about what she does," he said, and his tone was even, not pointed, just factual, the way someone states the dimensions of a room, "but I know what the federal government knows. And it is considerable." He handed the microphone back. The applause started slowly and then built, the way it does when people aren't sure what they're responding to but feel they should respond to something. I kept my eyes on the table in front of me for a moment, the water glass, the linen, the half-eaten dinner roll, and then I looked up. My father was standing at the head table. He had stopped smiling. Not in an angry way, in the way of a man who has just been shown something he didn't know was there and is still calculating what it means. He was looking at me, not the acknowledgement across a crowded room look from earlier. Something else. The particular expression of someone who has suddenly understood that they have been measuring the wrong thing for a very long time and cannot unknow it. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I looked away. The party continued. The cake was brought out. There were photographs. The string quartet played something celebratory. Robert Haynes stopped at table 11 on his way back to his seat. He shook my hand again and said, "I meant it. His wife said it was lovely to meet me." The cousin of Brittany's cousin stared at me with an expression I didn't try to interpret. My father came to table 11 approximately 20 minutes later. He stood at the edge of the table, and the conversation around me went quiet in that way conversations do when they sense something weighted approaching. "I didn't realize," he said. He stopped. Started again. "I didn't realize how much I didn't know about the congressional brief." "It's okay," I said. It wasn't entirely true, but it was what I said. "It's not," he said. "I should have." He looked at the table for a moment, then back at me. "I should have known." I nodded. I didn't fill the silence for him, which was something I'd spent most of my life doing and had recently decided to stop. He sat down in one of the empty chairs beside me, and we talked, actually talked, the way we almost never do for the better part of an hour. He asked about my work. He asked real questions, the follow-up kind that means someone is actually listening. At one point, he asked about the Route 17 bridge, and I explained it, and he listened to all of it. I don't know what changed in him that night. I don't know if it held, but I know that for that hour, in the chair beside me at table 11, behind the column and next to the emergency exit with the red glow, he was paying attention. On the way out, I passed Haynes and his wife near the coat check. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't have to do that." He looked at me with the mild, direct expression of someone who has been in rooms of consequence long enough to know exactly what they're doing and why. "I've spent 40 years watching talented people get talked over," he said. "I had a microphone in 3 minutes. It seemed like a reasonable use of both." His wife laughed softly. I thanked them again. I drove back toward Phoenix in the dark, the red rocks long since faded into silhouette, the rental car quiet. I thought about the Route 17 bridge, which spans a flood corridor that swells to 3 times its normal width in heavy rain. I thought about the soil composition reports I'd spent 2 months reviewing, the load calculations, the anchoring methodology that differed from standard practice by 11 degrees. I thought about the fact that somewhere, on some document in a federal file, my name was attached to something that would outlast the party. The cake, the speech, the column, the table near the emergency exit. I thought about my father's face in the moment after Haynes handed the microphone back. I don't need a room to applaud for me. I stopped needing that some time ago. But there is something quiet, specific, and difficult to name about the moment when someone who was not looking finally turns and looks. The drive back was 3 hours. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need to fill the silence.